The rangefinder on this model is very much the same as the rangefinder on the Retina Type 014 Retina 2, which followed this one, and it's also pretty much exactly the same as the earliest examples on the Retina 2A camera, which hit the market about 1951, I think, from memory. Right, so I'll remove that return spring, pop this in the container so I don't lose it. I'm checking this arm to see how stiff or loose it is, and it is quite stiff. That return spring probably wouldn't have returned that to the infinity position. It means that the grease is that doesn't want to come undone. Put a tiny drop of solvent on that, and I'll give it a little hurry up with a screwdriver and hammer. That is really not interested in moving. Still, it's got to come apart, so I'm going to see what I can do. What I'll do in this case is I will hold a scalpel blade and a pair of pliers so there's just the edge, the back edge of it showing, enough to get into the groove of that screw, and use that to rotate the screw if I can. No, that just cammed out. The screw's now looking a little bit uglier than it once did. Other weapons of destruction. What have I got? That doesn't fit. Yep, it's loose. That was not looking promising for a minute. Take that off. We have a washer, a wavy washer. I'm just popping those in a container so they're not lost. Lift the arm off. And you can see we've got this brass or bronze bush in the middle. I'm marking the arm where that split in the bush is so that I can pop it back in exactly the same place. That bush looks to be circular, but it may be slightly eccentric. Obviously with a slot in it, it's going to act slightly eccentric. If you put it back in the same place, there's a higher likelihood you won't have to make a lot of extra adjustments to the rangefinder to get it back together and aligning correctly again. The prism at the end is held in place by 2 screws. Those screws also serve as the adjustment for the vertical alignment of the images. The prism has one silvered face, which is covered in black protective paint. You have a plain glass face on the front and one down in the tube there. That arrangement is the same on Retina 2 type 014s and Retina 2A cameras. On the Retina 2C, 3C types, they did away with the silvering. You just have 3 plain glass faces, and they rely on total internal reflection to give you your reflected image. So I just took that mask off the front, and the reason I took the mask off the front was that I'm going to clean this component in the ultrasonic cleaner to clean that semi-silvered mirror surface, and the ultrasonic cleaner is very good at cleaning off contaminants like paint. And I found to my cost a long time ago that these shields, a nice matte black finish, it all just comes off and then you've got to put all the matte black finish back on again. So I'd rather not have to do that. There's a small component in here, an optical component. I advise you don't disturb that setting. It's no fun when you do. It's a bugger to get back in place. This is right at the end of its travel, which is a little bit suspicious to me. I would have expected it to be sitting somewhere in the centre, neutrally. But I'm going to leave it exactly where it is. We'll see how we get on. Off to the ultrasonic cleaner. Alright, continue on with this camera, I suppose. This shield at the back here, this is goes underneath the rangefinder, and this is where the arm for the frame counter fits too. That sits in there. Here's the post for it. Do that up tight, and there's a spring that sits on that post and keeps this wheel pushed back out of contact with the frame counter, so that you only contact it when you press the wheel in to rotate it to set your frame counter. At other times it's kept back out of the way. This is a bit of an act to get that spring hooked back over its post, but it is quite possible. There we go. The frame counter doesn't need to be put in place now. It'll just pop off while I'm trying to fit the rangefinder in place. So I'll get the rangefinder fitted. The rangefinder I have cleaned. All back together, all appears to be good. As you saw, it was a bit of a fight getting that screw out. That was a bit unexpected. They're not normally as bad as that. Now I'll put a little spot of lacquer on the corners so that when it's screwed down back in place, it's not likely to be shifted should the camera be bumped. So I'll lower that into place. Get one of the two fixing screws, make sure the hole's lined up. Drop the screw into place. I think that's in there, is it? Can't see, it's so dark. No. That fell out. That time. It's the first screw. I got that started, I didn't tighten it right the way up. It's entertaining getting these screws dropped into position. Now I've got both screws in place. At this point I hold back on the rangefinder, pull it back to the back of the body as far as it goes against those screws. Do those screws up tight. Now it should stay in that position. So that means that once it's adjusted correctly at that position, there shouldn't be any further problems. So I'm just checking what that looks like. Yep, not getting much joy there. Alright, that rangefinder's working nicely. I'm happy I've got that correctly adjusted. The frame counter can go back on here now. So, let's see what we've got. Got the frame counter wheel and its spring. I'll check that they are clean. Just removing any grit and old grease. Put a smear of synthetic grease on the inside of that. Pop that component together. Pop its return spring in place. Tiny smear of synthetic grease in the centre. And pop it on its post. That should be fine. Now the top cover can go on. This is always a little bit of an act. Need 3 hands. Basically, we need to get our rewind lever at the back of the top plate here through the slot in the cover and get the cover tipped back over the front of the shutter release, and all at the same time. And the shutter release, of course, has got to be depressed for this to happen. And it can only be depressed if the film advance has been run round to that point. That's it. I'm just revolving that film sprocket with my thumb there, and you can see that that allowed me to depress the shutter release repeatedly. 2 screws hold our top cover in place, one at each end. They are chromed screws. It's a satin chrome finish, which means that it's extra delicate. Take care not to mar them. That's not lining up correctly. Now I don't know why. Is that top cover centered and seated? It appears to be. That's better. So we have our film advance knob, screws down, put my spanner in the back to hold the shaft from turning. Must always do that, not just turn it against the stop. And somewhere we should have the little release top, the top for the release, shutter release. This is it here. It screws on there. These are easily lost and easily damaged. And I don't have spares. In fact, I'm sure I've got cameras in my collection that lack them. That's fine. I'll twist it up with my fingers and no more. The rewind knob can go on top. I'll just put something through the fork of the rewind shaft to stop it turning. That's turned. Okay, so our body is good. That's good to go. Apart from final cleaning up and polishing, that's it. Next I have to do the shutter and lens assembly, but we're well on the way. I suspect the shutter and lens assembly will be tomorrow's job now. Alright, I have the shutter from the Retina 2 here to be serviced now that the body's all taken care of. So I just need to strip it down and service it. So where do we start? Well, on this one there's a lock screw here, pinhead screw, flattened off on one side to form a lock. So rotate that to unlock it. And we can rotate the cover, lift it off. I'm going to remove the screw from the aperture pointer here because it's really in the way. I could work around it, but I don't want to. Take that screw out. That's a very small screw. Be very careful not to lose that. the pointer should just lift off. It does. Lift off the speed cam ring. This is fairly simple as these shutters go. Lift off the shutter release lever. Unhook the main drive spring on the main lever. This component is called the main lever. If I can unhook the spring from the casing, I should be able to lift this arm out. Here it is. Lift this arm out of the shutter. And the 500th of a second spring, the high speed spring. That arm lifts out. Spring is integral. Take out the single screw that holds this little catch in place. This little catch holds the shutter in the cocked position until you press the release. We have a single screw here, and this screw, this little piece here, is the B lever that locks the shutter open, and when you hold your finger on the release, while you hold your finger on the release when it's been set to B or bulb. So the mechanism plate's stripped down as much as we need to now to remove it from the case. This is the lever that operates the blades. It swings the blade actuating ring backwards and forwards. You can see there it doesn't just drop back into position promptly. It is very sluggish, sticky. So there's certainly a problem in there. In this case the blades look quite oily. Quite likely the blade actuating ring is a bit gummy too. That's all I need to remove from the top of the case. There are 3 screws that hold the mechanism plate into the shutter case, and it's there, they come in from the back of the shutter case. The screw head there is clogged with probably dried out grease, possibly clear lacquer. I wouldn't expect that to be the case. So we can split them now. Here is our shutter case. The shutter case contains the diaphragm. The diaphragm is extremely gummy with oil. As I attempt to move that lever, those blades flex to quite a marked degree. It's because they're stuck together and they don't want to slide over each other. Here we have the mechanism plate. This is the back of the mechanism plate. The shutter blades are sitting there. Excuse me. The mechanism plate with the shutter blades attached. Of course, they should fall away easily. They're stuck together, as you can see. They're stuck with oil. So they certainly need to be cleaned. There's no other obvious problem with those at this stage. They're not really showing any signs that there's no corrosion on the blades or anything. And here you may be able to see, if I rotate that blade actuating ring, it should have just snapped back into position, but you can see it's sort of dragging itself slowly back into position. That's very gummy. In other words, the shutter blades were not the only problem. The problems lie deeper than that. They're in the mechanism plate itself, and that actuating ring is very sticky. So I've got to strip this down further. So I start here, remove the screw that holds the lever at the front of the blade actuating mechanism plate. That feels quite sticky, and I'm just checking the action here by hand. and it's not smooth and it's not free. It's quite gummy. So that tells me that the problem was not just with that lever, it's deeper. Have 3 screws hold the retainer plate. One is longer than the other, and that's usually in that position. Usually the other 2 are short. Some shutters there are 2 long screws. Yeah, this one's got 2 long screws. That's only got 1 short position. Take note of where they come from as you take them out, so you can put them back in the right place. There's the retainer. Looks quite oily. Certainly needs to be cleaned. Here's our blade actuating ring. It's pretty grimy looking, probably grease I would say, oils. And I'm checking now the action of the retard gear train. I'm holding back the pallets here with my finger. And I'm swinging the arm in and out. And it does swing through the full travel. It's not as prompt as it should be. I know from experience that'll be because there's dirt in there, and the dirt will be glued there effectively by the minuscule oil droplets that have probably formed in there. So that all needs to be cleaned. Turn my attention to the shutter case. We have 3 screws hold the retainer plate in place. I'm just checking to see if those screws are identical. If they're not identical, we'll have 1 countersunk head screw in one position. No, they are identical. I'll pop those screws to one side. Tip out my diaphragm blades. They're quite sticky. They're certainly stuck together. Even a dry diaphragm, if it's in the closed down position, they're interleaved to such an extent they'll come out as one piece, but these are just gummed up with oil. Here we have the case. The last thing in the case here is the ring that moves as you move the aperture pointer, and what it does is it swings inwards or outwards the blades. 2 screws here. They're shoulder screws, and there we have it. Our shutter is completely disassembled, at least as far as we need to disassemble it today. So I'll clean these components up and then put it all back together.